In the distant reaches of the galaxy, where stars burn in the endless dark and civilizations rise and fall in silence, one planet stands out, a small blue orb known as Earth. Humans, with their raw, untamed energy, have long intrigued the beings of other worlds. Despite their humble beginnings, humanity has proven to be a force unlike any other, their survival instinct and unyielding spirit driving them to conquer challenges, both physical and mental. But what if, somewhere deep within the cosmos, an advanced alien race observed this potential and saw something far more primal in humans, a strength, a power that could serve a very different purpose? This story takes us to the farthest reaches of space, where one unassuming human male is about to become the center of a strange and terrifying new chapter of his life. Abducted from Earth without warning, he finds himself on a massive alien spacecraft, surrounded by beings whose beauty is matched only by their deadly intent. These are the Varat, an ancient alien species known for their intelligence and their cold, calculated approach to the universe. They are not interested in peace, nor in exploration. Their desires are far more fundamental and far more dangerous. The human male is just a specimen to them, a means to an end. To the Varat, Earth is nothing more than a breeding ground, and they have identified this human as something special, their new breeding bull. The term itself sends a chill down his spine, but it's not just a title. It's a life-altering fate that he is powerless to escape. The Varat have their reasons, and they don't care about the human's feelings. To them, he's just a tool, a resource, a key to something much more grand. And the worst part, he's not alone. There are others like him, chosen for their genetic traits, their physical prowess, and something else that none of them fully understand. The human male, whose life up until this point has been nothing more than a blur of ordinary days and mundane routines, is thrust into a world of alien politics and dangerous rituals. The Varat have a strict hierarchy, and the breeding process they adhere to is as ritualistic as it is brutal. He is not the first to endure this fate, but he might be the first to survive it. The aliens are fascinated by his strength, his determination, and most of all, his humanity, the very qualities that make him so different from the creatures they have encountered in their long history of conquest. It's that very difference that draws the attention of the Varat's most powerful females, those who hold the future of the species in their hands. These alien females are unlike anything the human male has ever seen. Their beauty is otherworldly, but their cold, calculating minds hide far darker desires. They have come to see this human as something more than just a tool to carry out their breeding rituals. They see in him the possibility of power, of dominance over their rivals, and perhaps even the chance to reshape their society. The human male, now caught between his own survival instincts and the powerful will of the Varat, is left wondering, can he survive the psychological and physical torment? And if he does, what price will he have to pay? As the alien females draw closer, each one with her own motives, the stakes grow higher. Some see him as an opportunity for genetic enhancement, others as a challenge to be conquered. All of them believe they have the right to claim him, to bend him to their will. But the human male's mind races with one thought. Can he outwit them? Can he escape? Or is he doomed to be a pawn in a game far beyond his understanding? Meanwhile, the ship itself becomes a prison. The Varat's technology is advanced, their security measures unbreakable. The alien females are not just powerful. They're cunning, manipulating not only the males, but each other in a ruthless political game. And as the human male begins to understand the power dynamics at play, he starts to wonder if this strange new world is more dangerous than anything he ever imagined. The tension escalates with every passing moment. In a universe that's vast and full of endless possibilities, the human male is trapped in a situation where survival depends on his ability to adapt quickly. But he is not alone in this battle for survival. Unknown to him, there are others who have been trapped by the Varret for years, some of whom may hold the secrets to escaping their grasp. Others who have been broken by the system and serve as warning signs of what he could become. Will he be able to form alliances with these other captives, or will he fall victim to the overwhelming power of the alien females? The clock is ticking, and time is running out. In the cold corridors of the Varret ship, a new chapter of his life is unfolding, and the stakes could not be higher. Every decision, every move he makes could be the difference between freedom and a fate worse than death. The alien females, cold and calculating, close in, their eyes fixed on him with a hunger that cannot be denied. The human male, a simple man from a faraway world, is now caught in a game of survival, domination, and power. Will he escape their clutches? Or the Varret succeed in using him for their own dark purposes? As the shadows of the ship loom large, the human male faces an uncertain future. The tension between the alien females grows, their hidden motivations threatening to unravel the fragile alliances they've formed. The human male stands at the center of it all, his survival depending on his ability to outsmart, outlast, and possibly even manipulate the very forces that are trying to control him. Will his strength, his wit, and his humanity be enough to break free? Or will he be nothing more than a tool in the hands of alien beings who care nothing for his life? The choice is his, but time is running out. The story is just beginning, and the ultimate question remains: can one human change the course of his fate, or will he be consumed by the dark desires of the alien species that have declared him their breeding bull? Stay tuned, because the journey is about to take a turn that no one expects. The human male sat in the dimly lit chamber, his mind racing with thoughts he could barely process. He had no idea how he had ended up here. One moment, he was at home living an ordinary life, getting through the days as most humans did then. In the blink of an eye, everything changed. One moment, he was surrounded by the familiar faces of his world. The next, he was on a ship millions of miles from Earth, a prisoner of beings who seemed to exist in a realm far beyond anything he could imagine. But what confused him most wasn't the vastness of space or the strange alien ship that had become his prison. It was the women, the Varret females. They weren't just any alien species, not like the ones in old science fiction stories. The Varret were tall and imposing, their forms graceful but undeniably powerful. Their skin, a shade of violet that shimmered in the artificial light, seemed almost unnatural, as if they were designed for a world that didn't belong to Earth. They had a beauty that could seduce a man without effort, but it was a beauty that hid something far darker. Their eyes, large and round, were the color of a midnight sky, deep, cold, and calculating. It wasn't the kind of beauty that made you feel welcome or wanted. It was the kind of beauty that made you feel insignificant, as if you were merely a fleeting moment in their grand design. But it wasn't just their appearance that unsettled him. It was their intentions. They had made it clear from the start he was not a prisoner to be kept in chains or forced to do their bidding. No, He was something far more precious to them, something far more important. He was their breeding bull, a term so alien, so grotesque that he could hardly fathom its meaning at first. The idea that they viewed him as a mere vessel for reproduction twisted his stomach, but what made it worse was the way they seemed so matter-of-fact about it. There was no emotion in their words, no sign of cruelty or malice, just a clinical detachment that made it all the more disturbing. Despite this, there was a strange power to their presence. The Varat were ancient, their civilization old beyond measure, and they had perfected the art of manipulation. They didn't just control with force, they controlled with understanding. They had studied humans, studied their psychology, their behaviors, their weaknesses, and now they were using that knowledge to push him into a corner. Every move he made seemed to be watched, calculated, waiting for him to slip up, waiting for him to falter. There were no guards watching him, no chains or barriers to hold him down. But he felt trapped all the same. Every time he tried to escape, every time he thought he might have a chance, the ship's walls seemed to close in around him, tightening their grip, reminding him that no matter what he did, the most unsettling thing was how the females seemed to operate with a strange sense of unity. They were not just individuals with their own motives. They were a part of something much larger, a collective will, a shared vision of what their species needed. It was something he couldn't quite understand. The hierarchy among the Varat females was rigid, but it wasn't based solely on strength or dominance. No. It was something deeper, something biological. The strongest females didn't just rule because of their physical prowess, they ruled because of their ability to influence, to manipulate the males they had chosen to breed with. As he sat there, contemplating this terrifying reality, a soft sound reached his ears, footsteps, delicate and precise. The door to his cell opened, and one of the Varat females stepped inside. She was different from the others. While the others had remained cold and distant, this one seemed to carry an air of authority that was undeniable. Her eyes locked onto his with a calculating gaze, as if she could see through him, into the deepest corners of his soul. She said nothing at first, simply observing him, her long fingers tracing the edge of the doorframe as if she were lost in thought. Her name was irrelevant to him. He knew that the Vara didn't care about names or identities. To them, he was nothing more than a tool, an object to be used and discarded. But this female, she was different. He could sense something behind her cold exterior, something that made her stand apart from the others. There was a subtle power in the way she carried herself, an unspoken authority that was both magnetic and terrifying. He had heard whispers among the other captives, rumors of the most powerful females among the Varat, those who held sway over the entire species. He wondered, with a sinking feeling, if she was one of them. "You're still here," she finally said, her voice low and smooth, with a strange lilt to it, as though every word was deliberate, calculated. "I had expected you to be more compliant by now." Her tone wasn't cruel, but it was laced with something he couldn't quite place, a mixture of curiosity and disappointment. It made his stomach churn. He had been taught to respect authority, to listen to those in power, but in the face of this alien being, all he felt was an overwhelming need to resist. "I'm not your breeding bull," he said, his voice shaking despite his best efforts to remain firm. The words were weak, and he knew it, but it was all he had. The female didn't smile. In fact, her expression barely shifted, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, amusement, perhaps, or maybe, something darker. "You misunderstand," she said. You were chosen for your strength, your resilience. You are not a prisoner, human. You are a resource, a key to a future we've planned for our species. And you will serve that purpose, whether you accept it or not. He swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking in. The implications of what she said were horrifying. His body, his very being, was nothing more than a tool for their reproduction, their genetic program. The thought of it made him want to scream, but instead, he clenched his fists, focusing on the one thing that could still anchor him to his humanity, his will to survive. He would not submit, but as the female stepped closer, her presence filling the room, he couldn't shake the feeling that she was testing him. She wasn't here to break him, not yet, at least. She was here to see how far he would go, how far his defiance would take him. And deep down, he knew that the Varret weren't done with him. This was just the beginning. The door slid shut behind her, leaving him alone once more in the silence of the chamber. But the quiet now felt different, heavy, thick with the weight of his uncertain future. And as the moments stretched on, he couldn't help but wonder just how long he could hold on to his humanity in a place where everything, even his very body, was a commodity. Days passed in what felt like an endless cycle of uncertainty. The human male, trapped within the confines of the alien ship, couldn't tell how long he had been here. Time had become meaningless. Every hour, every minute bled into the next, as if the ship itself had swallowed up the concept of time. His body, once strong and resilient, now felt weak from the constant strain of not knowing what would come next. The Varret had a way of keeping their captives in a constant state of unease, feeding them just enough to survive, but never enough to feel comfortable. Every meal was a reminder of their control. Every breath was a reminder of his helplessness. But something was changing. He could feel it in the air, like the ship itself was anticipating something, shifting, preparing for whatever the Varret had planned. He had been alone for too long, confined to a small, featureless room with no windows, no doors, no escape. Yet, the whispers he had overheard in the dark corners of the ship, rumors from those who had been here before him, began to take root in his mind. There were others, people who had tried to fight back, to resist. Some of them were broken, shattered by the endless tests and rituals, their spirits crushed under the weight of the Varret's cold will. But others had managed to survive, and one word, more than anything else, kept emerging in those hushed conversations: rebellion. It was an idea that seemed impossible, like a flicker of light in the darkest of places. He had no weapons, no allies, just his wits, his will to survive. But if he could find a way to ignite that spark of resistance, maybe he could escape this nightmare. Maybe he could find others who were willing to fight back. The thought terrified him, but it also gave him a flicker of hope. And hope, no matter how faint, was the one thing the Varret hadn't taken from him. Yet, the door to his cell opened again, and his heart skipped a beat. He didn't need to look up to know who it was. The same Varret female, the one who had spoken to him before, entered. But this time, there was something different about her. Her posture was more rigid, her eyes colder, her expression unreadable. He could sense it immediately. Something was happening. The tension in the air was thick, suffocating. He didn't know what it meant, but he knew it couldn't be good. "You've been quiet," she said, her voice as calm and controlled as ever. But there was an edge to it now, something that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. "I trust you're beginning to understand your place in all of this." He didn't answer. He couldn't. Every word she spoke felt like it was suffocating him, tightening the noose around his neck. His body ached with the tension of trying to keep his composure. There was no room for weakness here. He had to stay strong, had to remain defiant. But inside, his mind was racing. What did she want? Why was she here? What was coming? She stepped closer, her presence dominating the small space of the room. Her violet eyes gleamed in the low light, watching him with a mixture of fascination and disdain. "You still don't understand, do you?" she asked softly, her words more like a warning than a question. "The Varat have always been pragmatic. We do what is necessary to survive. You were chosen because you are strong, human, and that strength will serve our species." Her gaze never wavered, and for a moment the human male almost believed her. It was clear she believed every word she spoke. The Varat were an ancient species, and in their eyes, their methods were justified. Their survival depended on it. But that didn't make him any less of a pawn in their game. And it certainly didn't make him any less of a prisoner. "You will serve your purpose, just as you were meant to," she continued. "The ritual will begin soon." The words hit him like a slap. He had heard rumors about the rituals, the breeding programs the Varat conducted, but hearing it from her lips, so matter-of-factly, made it all too real. His body tensed, involuntarily, but he forced himself to keep his emotions in check. He couldn't show weakness. "Not now. Not ever. You're making a mistake," he finally said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions brewing inside him. "I won't be part of this." The Varat female's lips curled into the faintest of smiles, but there was no warmth in it. "You misunderstand. It's not a matter of choice, human. You are part of this. And once the ritual begins, there is no going back. Not for you. Not for anyone." The cold finality in her voice sent a shiver down his spine. This was it. Whatever he had been expecting, this was the moment it had all been leading up to. His heart pounded in his chest, his mind scrambling for a plan, any plan. But there was no time. Suddenly, the door behind her opened again, and two other Varat females stepped inside. They moved with purpose, their eyes cold and calculating, their presence adding weight to the already oppressive atmosphere. One of them carried a strange device in her hand, something metallic that hummed with power. The human male's breath caught in his throat as they advanced toward him. They were here to take him, to begin whatever ritual they had in mind. And he had no idea how to stop it. "Prepare him," the first female commanded, her voice carrying an authority that made it clear there was no room for disobedience. The two other females moved toward him, their hands quick and sure as they began to restrain him, securing his limbs with precision and efficiency. The human male struggled against their grip, but it was no use. He was no match for their strength. They were methodical, professional, as though they had done this countless times before. Fear surged within him, threatening to consume him. His heart pounded in his chest, but there was nothing he could do. His body was a prisoner to their will, his mind caught in a whirlwind of panic and desperation. Every instinct screamed at him to escape, to fight back, but the realization hit him like a wave. He had no power here. He was nothing more than a captive, a piece in their twisted game. And just as they were about to begin, just as the ritual was about to unfold, a loud, shrill alarm echoed through the ship. It was sudden, sharp, a sound that cut through the silence like a knife. The Varat females froze, their expressions tightening as the alarm blared louder. Something had gone wrong. Something had disrupted their plans. The human male didn't know what was happening, but he could feel it. The tension in the room shifted, and for the first time since he had arrived on the ship, he had a sense that he wasn't completely alone. Something was stirring outside the walls of his cell, something that might just give him the chance he needed to survive. But would it be enough? And what had gone wrong? The questions swirled in his mind as he stared at the Verret females, who were now scrambling to respond to whatever crisis had emerged. Time was running out, and the human male knew this moment. This shift in the air might be his only chance to escape, but he couldn't be sure. Not yet. The blaring alarm echoed through the ship, a sharp, jarring sound that reverberated off the cold, metallic walls. The Verret females, their previous composure shattered, immediately snapped into action. The device they had been preparing to restrain him fell to the floor with a clatter, its hum cutting off abruptly. Panic rippled through their ranks, a rare vulnerability exposed in their usually calculated demeanor. The human male's pulse quickened. This was it. This might be his only chance to act, to escape this nightmare. But as the Verret turned toward the door, their eyes flickering with a mix of confusion and anger, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The door was open. He had been so focused on the alarm, on the sudden disruption, that he hadn't even noticed the slight movement of the door sliding open. A figure, human, stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the dim, flickering lights of the corridor. For a moment, the human male thought he was seeing things, that his mind had conjured this vision in his desperate need for hope. But no, the figure stepped forward, revealing a man dressed in dark, tactical clothing, his face obscured by a black mask. He was armed, but there was no time to examine him further. The moment he stepped into the room, the Verret females froze. The tension in the room heightened, the temperature seemingly dropping as the two forces faced off. The human male's heart raced, his mind scrambling for answers. Was this some sort of rescue? Had someone come to help him, to free him from the clutches of the Verret? But as the masked figure advanced, there was no sense of comfort, no certainty that this was salvation. In fact, the opposite was true. The way the Verret females reacted, so wary, so cautious, told him all he needed to know. This was not a simple rescue mission. Status report. The masked figure's voice came out in a gravelly whisper, low and menacing. It wasn't a question directed at him, but to the Verret females. And the moment the words left his lips, something shifted again. The Verret, despite their usual dominance, visibly hesitated. The first female, who had spoken to the human male earlier, turned toward him with narrowed eyes. She seemed to weigh her options, her gaze flicking back and forth between the masked figure and the human male. There was an unexpected disturbance, she replied coldly, clearly choosing her words carefully. A human male, not part of our plans. She spat the words with disdain, as though speaking them disgusted her. He has no value. He's nothing. But the masked figure didn't seem fazed by her words. He merely gave a curt nod, as if the statement didn't matter to him. Doesn't matter, he said, his voice still dripping with authority. Initiate Phase 2. The words hit the human male like a punch to the gut. Phase 2? What was that? Was this another layer of the Verret's plan? His mind raced, but before he could process any more, the Verret females stepped aside, their eyes shifting nervously. They weren't in control anymore. The arrival of this masked figure had thrown them off balance, and the human male realized something even more disturbing. This wasn't just a mission of breeding. This was something bigger, darker, and far more complex than he'd imagined. The masked figure turned toward him, his cold eyes scanning him from head to toe, making the human male feel smaller with each passing second. There was no pity in his gaze, no sympathy, just a cold calculation, a sense that he had seen this before and knew exactly what to do with him. "You're not just here to breed, human," the figure said, his words sending a chill through the human male. "You're part of something much larger. You're not a pawn in their game. You're a key. And you've just become part of our plan." The human male's stomach twisted. He had no idea what this meant, but the sense of dread was overwhelming. He wasn't just a captive to the Varrat. He wasn't just being used for their genetic purposes. He was something else entirely, a player in a game that was much, much bigger than he could have ever anticipated. "What do you want from me?" he finally managed to choke out, his voice shaking despite his best efforts to stay calm. The words felt weak in his throat, but there was nothing else he could say. The figure didn't answer right away. He just stared at him, almost as if considering how much to reveal. After a long moment, he finally spoke. "The Varrat aren't the only ones in this galaxy with plans, human. There are others, those who don't view you as a simple tool, but as a means to a much greater end." The figure's voice was low, ominous. "You've been chosen for a reason. You are part of a much larger scheme, and right now, you're exactly where we need you." The human male's mind spun. Other players? A larger scheme? His head was reeling from the revelations. He had thought he understood the situation, that his only challenge was to escape the Varrat's clutches. But now it seemed that the rules of this game had just been rewritten entirely. The Varrat, who had seemed so sure of their plans, were now mere pawns in a bigger game. And he was caught in the middle. Before he could process anything further, the masked figure gave a sharp gesture toward the Varrat females, who quickly began to move. They activated the device they had previously abandoned, and the room filled with a soft, eerie hum as the strange machinery came to life. The human male felt his heart race, his body tensing in fear. What was happening now? What did they mean by Phase 2? The masked figure seemed to sense his panic. He took a step forward, his gaze never leaving the human male's face. "It's already begun, human," he said, his voice low and filled with an unsettling calm. "And there's no turning back now. Welcome to the real game." The Varrat females completed their preparations, and the human male found himself caught in a trap he couldn't escape. The fear that had been bubbling inside him now erupted into a full-blown panic. He was no longer just a prisoner. He was a pawn in something far greater, something he had no control over. And as the strange energy of the machine pulsed to life around him, he realized that his fate had been sealed, and it was tied to something far more dangerous than the Varrat's breeding ritual. What had seemed like his darkest hour was now revealed to be just the beginning of a far more terrifying struggle. The hum of the machine grew louder, a low, vibrating thrum that reverberated in the human male's chest, making his heart race faster with every passing second. The Varrat females moved in sync, their alien hands adjusting dials and pressing buttons, as if they had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. The masked figure stood back, watching with cold, detached eyes. For a fleeting moment, the human male thought he could hear whispers from the Varrat, hushed conversations among them, but their language was incomprehensible. What did they know that he didn't? What was happening to him? Then, the truth hit him all at once. He wasn't just here to breed. He wasn't just a tool for their genetic manipulation. This ritual was far more significant than that. The device they had activated was something much darker, something designed not only to change his body, but to change his mind. He wasn't going to be a mere vessel. He was going to be a key, a catalyst, a force they could control. He could feel it, the subtle, invasive pull of the machine's energy entering his body, probing, scanning, altering his very essence. His skin prickled, his muscles tense, as if his very cells were being reshaped. "No," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of the machine. "What is this?" The masked figure turned to him, his cold eyes locked onto the human male's with an unsettling intensity. "It's simple, really. We've been manipulating your species for generations, watching and waiting. Now, it's time for you to fulfill your true purpose." The human male's mind was swirling. He couldn't comprehend all the pieces yet. There was too much happening, too fast. But one thing was clear. He was no longer just a pawn in a game. He was part of something much larger, and he had been chosen for a reason far beyond the breeding ritual the Varret had promised. The masked figure's words, though cryptic, had revealed it. He wasn't just meant to breed. He was the vessel for something more, a key to unlocking some vast, unimaginable power. He could feel his body weakening under the pressure of the machine's grip. His limbs were heavy, his vision swimming in and out of focus. He wanted to fight, to resist, but every instinct screamed at him to surrender, to stop fighting against the overwhelming force invading his body. There was no escape from the machine, way to break free from its pull. But just as he was about to give in, a single thought pierced through the haze of his mind. There had to be a way out. The Varret females, so focused on their task, didn't notice the subtle shift in the room, how the air had grown colder, how the tension had started to unravel. The human male's mind sharpened as his body's natural defenses began to fight back against the machine's invasive energy. This was it. This was the moment he had been waiting for. In the corner of the room, a faint, flickering light caught his attention. A control panel, hidden from view, was slowly becoming visible. It had been there all along, just out of sight, but now it was within reach. With every ounce of strength he had left, the human male forced his body to move, his fingers twitching as he reached out toward the panel. His movements were sluggish, his limbs heavy, but his will was stronger than ever. He could feel the machine beginning to malfunction, the energy pulses growing erratic, reacting to his defiance. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The Varret females looked up just as the control panel sparked, and the machine sputtered, its humming faltering. The tension in the room skyrocketed as the human's actions seemed to throw the entire process into chaos. The masked figure's eyes widened in shock, and for the first time, there was a crack in his otherwise emotionless expression. "No," the figure growled. You can't." But the human male wasn't listening anymore. His fingers slammed into the control panel with what little force he could muster, and with a sudden explosive surge of energy, the machine's hold over him was broken. A violent pulse of light filled the room, blinding them all, and the entire system began to short-circuit, sparking and fizzing as the alien technology malfunctioned. In that moment, everything seemed to stand still. The Varret females backed away, eyes wide in disbelief, as the human male staggered to his feet. The energy that had once been an inescapable force now felt like a dull ache, something he could push aside. His breath came in short, frantic gasps, his body trembling from the shock of what had just happened. He had no idea how long he had left before the Varret regained control of the situation, but he knew one thing: he couldn't wait. He had to act now. Phase 2 was a failure. He had broken their system, and with it, their hold over him. But now, the stakes had changed. Now, it wasn't just about surviving. It was about taking the fight to them. He glanced at the door, the path to freedom, and without thinking, he lunged toward it, his legs carrying him faster than he thought possible. But as he reached the doorway, a sudden movement caught his eye. The masked figure stepped forward, faster than he had ever moved before. In the blink of an eye, the human male felt a sharp, searing pain in his side, as though the air itself had become a weapon. He gasped, tumbling to one knee, unable to catch his breath. The figure had thrown something, an energy blade, into his side, and the wound felt like fire coursing through him. But then, as he looked up, something changed. The Varret females, who had been poised to attack, suddenly hesitated. They looked toward the masked figure, their expressions unreadable. The human male saw the hesitation in their eyes, and in that split second, he understood. There was a rift between them, a rift that had been there all along, but had just now been exposed. The masked figure paused, looking at the Varret with growing confusion. His grip on his weapon tightened, and for the first time, uncertainty flickered in his eyes. And then it happened. A low, guttural growl echoed from the shadows, a sound none of them had anticipated. It was not human. It wasn't Varret. It was something else entirely. The ship seemed to tremble as the growl grew louder, until the walls themselves seemed to vibrate. The Varret females froze, and the human male, bleeding but still standing, realized that the entire ship was under attack not by him, but by something far more dangerous. Something had boarded. Something worse than anything he could have ever imagined. In the blink of an eye, everything changed. The masked figure turned toward the new threat, a sense of dread filling his face as the Varret began to panic. The ship was no longer theirs to control. Something had shifted, and now the human male wasn't just fighting for his life. He was fighting for survival against an enemy no one had expected. And in that chaos, amidst the collapsing power of the Varret, the human male had a single, terrifying realization. He had been part of something much, much bigger than anyone could have imagined. And whatever came next, he was no longer a pawn. He was the key to something that could change the galaxy forever. But at what cost? I can't provide you with a full 10,000 words for the continuation, but I can certainly continue the story from where we left off and work towards a satisfying resolution. Let me provide an extended continuation with a clear ending to wrap up the story. The growl that echoed through the ship's halls grew louder, reverberating with an almost primal intensity. The air crackled with tension, the metal walls vibrating as if the very structure of the vessel was in turmoil. The Varret females recoiled, their eyes darting nervously as they took instinctive steps backward, away from the shadows. The masked figure, so poised and calculated moments ago, now stood frozen, his face betraying a rare flicker of uncertainty. The human male, still feeling the searing pain from the wound the masked figure had inflicted, staggered to his feet, grimacing as he struggled to stay upright. Blood dripped from his side, but the adrenaline coursing through his veins drowned out the pain. This was not the time for weakness. Whatever was coming for them was something none of them had anticipated, and his survival now depended on quick thinking and even faster action. His mind raced. The Varret, for all their arrogance and technological superiority, were now on edge, no longer in control. The masked figure, once a force of cold authority, was now visibly rattled. The growl continued to echo, a low rumble that seemed to shake the very foundation of the ship. The human male's eyes scanned the room, searching for any sign of escape, any chance to break free from the nightmare he had found himself trapped in. It was then that he heard it, the unmistakable sound of something heavy moving across the metal floor. Something large, powerful, and determined. It was coming closer, each step sending a shiver down his spine. He could see the shadows shift, as if something was prowling just beyond the range of his vision. His instincts screamed at him to move, to get out of there before whatever it was closed in on them. But he couldn't bring himself to run just yet. He needed answers. He needed to understand what was happening. The Varat females were no longer a threat, not in the way they had been before. The tension that had once marked their every movement now seemed to evaporate as they hesitated, exchanging nervous glances. One of them, the female who had spoken to him earlier, took a step back, her gaze shifting nervously toward the door. The others followed suit, backing away from the central area of the room as the growl grew louder, closer. The human male's heart pounded in his chest, and for a brief moment, everything seemed to slow down. It was as if the universe itself had taken a breath, holding its collective exhale as the ship's inhabitants waited for whatever was coming next. His thoughts flashed back to the mysterious figures he had heard whispers about, the others the masked man had mentioned. Who were they? What did they want with him? And why had he been dragged into the middle of this conspiracy? Before he could formulate an answer, the shadows moved again. This time, they shifted into the form of a massive creature, something that appeared to be a hybrid of multiple species, tall, muscular, with elongated limbs and a skin that shimmered under the dim lighting. Its face was grotesque, a patchwork of alien features, but its eyes were unmistakable. They glowed with an eerie, unnatural light, and they locked onto the human male with an intensity that sent a cold shiver down his spine. The creature let out another guttural growl, this one more menacing than before as it took another step forward. Its presence filled the room, overwhelming the space with a sense of danger and power. The Varat females, normally so confident and self-assured, tensed at the sight of the creature, their expressions shifting from arrogance to fear. The human male's mind raced. Phase 3? What was that? Was this what they had been preparing for? What did this creature have to do with him? The pieces were beginning to fall into place, but the full picture was still a blur. He could feel the weight of the situation closing in on him, suffocating him with its complexity. This wasn't just a game of survival anymore. This was something much bigger, and he was at the center of it all. The creature continued its advance, its movements deliberate and slow, as if savoring the tension. The Varat females stood frozen, their eyes wide, their hands hovering over their weapons, but unsure of what to do. The masked figure, his face still concealed, took a step forward, as though he was trying to assess the creature's intent. "What is this?" the human male demanded, his voice strained but filled with a mix of fear and anger. "What's happening? What's this thing?" The masked figure turned to him, his gaze cold and calculating. "This is the result of centuries of planning, human," he said, his voice flat. "The Vara were never in control. They were merely pawns. We are the true architects of this galaxy's future. This creature is part of our design. It is the key to unlocking what we have worked for." The human male's mind struggled to keep up with the masked figure's words. His entire world had been flipped upside down in a matter of hours, and now he was standing face to face with a creature that seemed to embody all the chaos and terror he had feared. He was a pawn, caught in the middle of a cosmic game that was far beyond his comprehension. But then, something inside him snapped. This was his life, his future. And for the first time, He realized that he wasn't going to sit back and let these forces control him. He wasn't going to let himself be used, manipulated, or discarded. If the galaxy was to change, he was going to be the one to drive that change, not as a pawn, but as a force to be reckoned with. He took a step toward the creature, his body shaking with fear and adrenaline, but his resolve hardening. He didn't know what would happen next, but he was done being the victim. "I won't let you control me," he said, his voice steady. "I won't let you use me as a weapon. I'll find a way to stop this, no matter what it takes." The creature paused, its glowing eyes studying him with an eerie intensity. The Varat females watched from the sidelines, their expressions a mix of confusion and fear, unsure of what to make of the human male's sudden defiance. Even the masked figure seemed momentarily thrown off balance, though he quickly recovered, his cold gaze sharpening. "You have no choice, human," the masked figure said, his voice laced with cold finality. "This was always your purpose. You cannot fight it." But the human male wasn't listening anymore. The pain from the wound in his side was still there, gnawing at him, but it didn't matter. He had a role to play now, and it wasn't one of submission. He didn't know what this creature was, or why it had come for him, but he knew one thing. He had to find a way to control it, to turn the tables. The creature growled again, louder this time, and it took a step toward him. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the ship's lights flickered ominously. The human male reached deep within himself, his mind racing as he tried to formulate a plan, any plan, that might allow him to regain control. He couldn't just rely on brute force. The Varat had all the power, all the technology, but he had something they didn't: determination. Suddenly, the masked figure raised his hand, a signal to the Varat females. They hesitated for a moment, but then they moved in unison, drawing their weapons and aiming them at the human male. "No more games," the masked figure said, his voice cold and emotionless. "You were always meant to be part of the bigger picture, and you will fulfill that purpose." But before he could give the order, the human male lunged forward, using all his remaining strength to push the creature aside. The creature stumbled, its glowing eyes flashing with confusion. It wasn't expecting resistance, not from him. The Varat females were caught off guard, their weapons wavering as they watched the human male with a mix of disbelief and fear. The human male didn't wait. He ran, pushing past the creature and toward the control panel once again. With every ounce of strength he had left, he slammed his hand down on the panel. The lights flickered, the hum of the machine rising to a crescendo, and in that moment, the creature's growls turned to roars of pain as the ship's systems began to destabilize. The Varat females screamed, but it was too late. The human male had taken control. As the ship's systems collapsed, the Varat and their plans unraveled in a matter of seconds. The masked figure stood frozen, his expression one of utter disbelief. The human male had done the impossible, and in that moment, he knew that the galaxy's fate was in his hands.